Tom wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished checking the last power coupling in Luna Station's maintenance sector. The large metal corridors echoed with the sound of his boots as he packed up his tools. His shift had run 3 hours longer than planned because of a faulty reactor that refused to cooperate. He looked at his watch and felt his stomach drop. The last transport to Earth was scheduled to leave in 15 minutes. If he missed it, he would have to wait another week before the next passenger ship arrived. His sister was getting married in 3 days, and he had promised to be there. Tom grabbed his duffel bag and ran through the station's busy corridors. Luna Station was always crowded with miners, traders, and travelers from dozens of different worlds. People pushed past him as he dodged between cargo haulers and food vendors. The docking bay stretched out like a massive metal cave filled with ships of every size and shape. Transport ships, cargo vessels, and private craft sat in numbered bays that went on for what seemed like miles. Tom checked his ticket as he ran. Bay 7. He needed to find Bay 7. His lungs burned as he sprinted past Bay 3, then Bay 4. A group of tall, blue-skinned aliens blocked his path as they unloaded strange containers from their ship. Tom squeezed around them and kept running. Bay 5 passed by on his left. Then Bay 6. The announcement system crackled to life above his head. Final boarding call for Earth Transport 447, departing Bay 7 in 5 minutes. Tom's heart pounded. He could see the numbers ahead. Bay 7 should be right there. He spotted a sleek white ship with its boarding ramp still down. Without stopping to look closely at the bay number, he rushed up the ramp just as it started to close. The interior of the ship looked different than he expected. Instead of the usual cramped passenger seating, he found himself in what looked like a cargo hold. Strange containers lined the walls and soft blue lights cast an odd glow over everything. The walls were covered in symbols he had never seen before. Before he could turn around, the ship shuddered and began to move. Tom felt the familiar sensation of takeoff as artificial gravity kicked in. He was already in space. This doesn't look right, Tom said to himself. He walked toward what he hoped was the passenger area, but the corridor ahead looked nothing like a transport ship. The walls curved in unusual ways and the ceiling was too low for most humans. Tom found a small room filled with what looked like sleeping pods. Each pod was barely big enough for someone his size. Strange writing covered control panels next to each pod. This was definitely not the Earth transport. He retraced his steps and found another corridor that led toward the front of the ship. Voices drifted from that direction, but they didn't sound like any language he knew. The words were musical and flowing with sounds that seemed impossible for human vocal cords to make. Tom approached slowly and peered around a corner. His eyes went wide. 6 figures moved around what was clearly the ship's bridge. They were humanoid, but definitely not human. Each stood about a foot taller than Tom, with graceful builds and skin that had a slight purple tint. Their hair was long and white, flowing down their backs like liquid silver. They wore form-fitting uniforms that looked like they were made from some kind of flexible metal. The one in the center appeared to be giving orders. Her voice carried authority, and the others responded quickly to her commands. Tom noticed that their ears were pointed and their eyes were larger than human eyes, with pupils that seemed to shift color in the blue light. Tom backed away slowly, his mind racing. He had definitely boarded the wrong ship. These were aliens, and he was now trapped on their vessel as it traveled through space to who knows where. He made it back to the cargo hold and sat down on one of the containers to think. His communicator wouldn't work this far from Luna Station. Even if it did, what could anyone do? By the time a rescue ship reached him, this alien vessel could be anywhere in the galaxy. Tom was examining the strange containers when he heard footsteps in the corridor. Multiple sets of footsteps moving in his direction. He looked around for somewhere to hide, but the cargo hold was too open. The footsteps grew closer. Tom stood up and tried to look as harmless as possible. 6 alien women entered the cargo hold. The one in front, obviously their leader, stopped when she saw him. Her large eyes widened in surprise, and she said something in her musical language to the others. They surrounded Tom quickly but kept their distance. One of them held a device that looked like a scanner and pointed it at him. It made a series of beeping sounds that seemed to alarm them. The leader stepped forward and spoke to Tom in her alien language. When he didn't respond, she tried again, speaking more slowly. Tom caught something that sounded like a question, but he had no idea what she was asking. "I'm sorry," Tom said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. I don't understand your language. I'm human. From Earth. I got on the wrong ship by mistake. The aliens looked at each other with expressions that Tom couldn't read. The one with the scanner said something urgent to the leader. The scanner was still beeping rapidly. The leader, who Tom would later learn was called Commander Zara, made a decision. She gestured to her crew and they moved to surround Tom more closely. One of them produced what was clearly some kind of weapon, though she kept it lowered. Zara spoke into a device on her wrist. The ship's communication system activated, and her voice echoed through the corridors in her alien language. Tom heard the word that sounded like quarantine in several Earth languages. Two of the aliens took positions by the cargo hold entrance while the others continued to scan Tom with their devices. The scanners kept making those alarming beeping sounds. Tom tried again. Please, I'm not dangerous. I'm just a maintenance worker. I was trying to catch a transport to Earth and I got on your ship by mistake. Zara tilted her head as if trying to understand. She said something to one of her crew members, a shorter alien with intricate markings on her arms. That crew member worked on a handheld device for several minutes. The device projected a hologram into the air between Tom and the aliens. It showed images of different species, none of which looked human. Zara pointed at Tom and then at the hologram, clearly asking which species he belonged to. Tom shook his head. Human, I'm human. We're not in your database. This seemed to alarm them even more. Zara spoke rapidly to her crew, and Tom caught a sense of urgency in her voice. The crew member with the markings on her arms worked faster on her device. After a few minutes, the device began to produce sounds that were clearly attempts at human speech, though heavily distorted. What are you? Came out as something like, what are you? Tom felt a surge of hope. I'm human. My name is Tom. I come from a planet called Earth. I got on your ship by accident. The translation device struggled with his words, but eventually produced sounds in the alien's language. Zara listened carefully and then responded. You are not in known species records, the device translated back to Tom. Your biological readings are anomalous. You may be artificial construct or biological weapon. Tom's heart sank. No, I'm completely natural. Humans just haven't made contact with your people before. We're a young species. We've only been in space for a few hundred years. The translation device worked on this for a long time. When it finally translated Tom's words, the alien's reaction was not what he hoped for. They looked even more suspicious. Zara spoke again, and the device translated. Unknown species claiming recent space development could be cover story for stealth infiltration. You will remain in quarantine until we reach homeworld for proper analysis. How long will that take? Tom asked. 17 days, came the translation. Tom sat down heavily on one of the containers. 17 days. His sister's wedding would be long over. His job would probably be gone too when he failed to return from what was supposed to be a simple trip home. But as he looked around the cargo hold, something else caught his attention. The lights were flickering in a pattern that seemed familiar. He had seen similar patterns in Earth ships when there were problems with the power distribution system. Tom stood up and walked toward one of the walls, ignoring the weapons that tracked his movement. He examined the wall panels more closely. The symbols were alien, but the underlying technology looked similar to systems he had worked on. Your power distribution is unstable, Tom said to the aliens. Those lights shouldn't be flickering like that. The translation device worked on his words. When the aliens heard the translation, they looked at each other with concern. One of them, a younger-looking alien with short hair, said something quickly to Zara. Zara responded to Tom through the translator. You will not interfere with ship systems. Return to designated area. But Tom had noticed something else, a subtle vibration in the floor that felt wrong. On Earth ships, that kind of vibration usually meant problems with the navigation system. Big problems. He looked at the aliens and tried to keep his voice calm. I think you have a navigation problem too. The ship is vibrating in a way that suggests your course correction system is malfunctioning. The translation device struggled with the technical terms, but the basic meaning got through. The aliens looked alarmed. The short-haired one, who seemed to be the ship's engineer, spoke rapidly to Zara. Zara's expression grew serious. She spoke into her wrist device again, and Tom heard her crew throughout the ship responding. The sense of urgency was clear even through the language barrier. The ship suddenly lurched to one side, throwing everyone off balance. Warning sounds echoed through the corridors, and the lights began flashing red. Tom steadied himself against a container and looked at the aliens. "Your navigation system is failing. If you don't fix it soon, you could crash into something or get thrown off course into dangerous space." The engineer alien, whose name Tom would learn was Nira, was working frantically on a handheld device. She showed the readings to Zara, and both of them looked worried. Tom took a step toward them. "I work on these kinds of systems. I might be able to help." 3 weapons immediately pointed at him. Zara spoke sharply, and the translator said, "Stay back. You will not touch ship systems," but the ship lurched again, more violently this time. Something in the walls made a grinding sound that definitely wasn't normal. Tom could see the fear in the aliens' eyes, even though their expressions were different from human ones. "Look," Tom said, "I know you don't trust me, but if your ship crashes, we all die. I'm not asking you to free me or let me go. I just want to help fix the problem so we all survive." Nira said something to Zara. Her voice sounded like she was explaining the technical situation. Zara listened and then looked at Tom for a long moment. The ship shook again. This time, one of the containers broke loose from its restraints and slid across the floor. The aliens had to jump out of the way. Zara made a decision. She spoke to her crew, and 2 of them moved to flank Tom while keeping their weapons ready. She nodded to Nira. Nira approached Tom cautiously and showed him her handheld device. The screen displayed what were clearly navigation readings, though the symbols were alien. Tom studied the patterns and recognized the problem immediately. "Your gyroscopic stabilizers are out of sync," Tom said. "See how these readings are oscillating? That's what's causing the course corrections to overcorrect." Nira looked at the readings Tom was pointing to. She said something to Zara, and her voice sounded surprised. Tom continued, "The fix isn't too complicated, but you need to recalibrate the whole system. If you have a manual override for the navigation computer, I can show you how to do it." The translation device worked on Tom's technical explanation. When the aliens heard it, Nira's eyes widened. She spoke rapidly to Zara, gesturing at Tom and then at her device. Zara looked torn between suspicion and necessity. The ship lurched again, and the decision was made for her. She spoke to Tom through the translator. "You will be escorted to engineering. Any attempt to sabotage ship systems will result in immediate termination. You will only touch what engineer permits." Tom nodded. "Understood. I just want to help." As the aliens escorted him toward the engineering section, Tom couldn't help but feel that this was his chance. If he could prove that humans weren't dangerous, if he could show them that he genuinely wanted to help, maybe he could convince them to let him go home, but first, he had to keep them all from crashing into whatever was out there in the dark between the stars. The engineering section was filled with technology that was both alien and strangely familiar. Tom could see the fundamental principles behind the systems, even if the execution was different from human technology, and he could see that they were in more trouble than the aliens realized. The navigation crisis was worse than it appeared. Without proper repairs, they had maybe 6 hours before the ship would be completely out of control. Tom rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The engineering section of the alien ship hummed with strange energy patterns that made Tom's teeth ache. Nira led him through a maze of crystalline control panels and flowing metal conduits that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. 2 guards flanked Tom closely, their weapons still drawn but lowered. Tom examined the main navigation console while Nira watched him suspiciously. The readings were worse than he had thought. The ship's course corrections were becoming more erratic by the minute, and the gyroscopic stabilizers were completely out of alignment. "This is bad," Tom said, pointing at a series of red indicators on Nira's handheld device. "Really bad. Your ship is basically flying blind right now." The translation device struggled with his words, but the meaning came through. Nira's face showed concern as she looked at the readings Tom was indicating. Tom studied the alien control systems. The basic principles were similar to human technology, but the execution was completely different. Where human ships use solid-state electronics and mechanical systems, this ship seemed to use some kind of crystalline matrix that responded to thought patterns. "How do you interface with this system?" Tom asked, gesturing at the main console. Nira demonstrated by placing her hand on a smooth crystal surface. The console responded immediately, displaying 3-dimensional holographic readouts that filled the air around them. Tom could see navigation data, engine status, and what looked like stellar cartography information. "That's incredible," Tom said. "Your technology is way more advanced than ours. But I think that might be part of the problem." Nira tilted her head in a questioning gesture that was surprisingly human-like. Tom pointed at the navigation display. "Your system is so sophisticated that it's trying to make perfect course corrections. But space isn't perfect. You need to account for gravitational variations, stellar wind, micro-debris. Your computer is fighting against natural forces instead of working with them." The translation device worked overtime to convert Tom's explanation. When Nira heard it, her eyes widened. She said something rapidly to the guards, who repeated it into their communication devices. Within minutes, Commander Zara arrived in engineering with 2 more crew members. She listened as Nira explained what Tom had told her. Zara's expression grew more serious as the explanation continued. The ship lurched again, more violently than before. This time, several crystal panels flickered and went dark. Sparks flew from an overhead conduit, and the artificial gravity fluctuated for a terrifying moment. Zara spoke to Tom through the translator. "What do you propose?" "I need to see your navigation programming," Tom said. "Not to change anything, just to understand how your system thinks. Then maybe I can suggest a different approach." Nira looked at Zara, who hesitated. Allowing an unknown alien to access their ship's core systems went against every protocol in the Valen Exploration Guild manual. But another violent course correction made the decision for her. Zara nodded to Nira. Nira guided Tom to a secondary console and placed his hand on the crystal interface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, Tom's mind was flooded with information. He could see the ship's navigation system as a living thing, a complex web of calculations and corrections that updated thousands of times per second. The system was trying to maintain a perfect trajectory through space, compensating for every tiny gravitational influence and spatial anomaly. "There's your problem," Tom said, pulling his hand back from the crystal. "Your navigation system is working too hard. It's like trying to walk a perfectly straight line, while someone keeps pushing you from different directions. The harder you try to stay straight, the more you stumble." Tom looked around the engineering section and noticed something interesting. The Valen had built everything to be perfect and precise, but space wasn't perfect. It was chaotic and unpredictable. "Human ships don't try to fly perfect courses," Tom explained. "We program our systems to expect imperfection. We build intolerances and margins of error. We work with the chaos instead of fighting." Nira's translation device struggled. With concepts like tolerances and margins of error, these ideas seemed foreign to Valen thinking. Tom tried a different approach. He picked up a piece of damaged crystal from the floor and showed it to Nira. "This crystal broke when the ship shook, right? But look at how it broke." The crystal had fractured in a complex pattern of interlocking pieces. Instead of shattering completely, it had broken in a way that still held together. "Your people make things to be perfect," Tom said. "But this crystal is actually stronger now because it can bend with the stress instead of trying to resist it." Nira examined the fractured crystal. She said something to Zara, and her voice sounded excited. Tom continued, "What if we programmed your navigation system the same way? Instead of trying to maintain perfect course corrections, we let it adapt to the natural forces around it." The ship shook again, but this time Tom was ready. He placed his hand back on the crystal interface and tried to access the navigation programming. The alien system resisted at first, but then seemed to recognize his intentions. Tom began making small adjustments to the navigation algorithms. Instead of precise corrections, he programmed in what humans would call fuzzy logic, systems that could make good decisions even with incomplete information. The process was strange and difficult. Tom had to think his instructions rather than type them, and the alien computer required explanations for concepts it had never encountered. But gradually, the navigation system began to respond differently. The violent course corrections became gentler. The ship still adjusted its trajectory, but now it did so smoothly, riding the gravitational currents instead of fighting them. Nira watched her instruments with amazement. The stress readings on the ship's hull dropped dramatically. The power consumption of the navigation system decreased by 30%. Most importantly, they were back on course toward their destination. "How did you do that?" Nira asked through the translation device. Tom smiled. "Human engineering isn't as advanced as yours, but we've learned to work with imperfection. We call it good enough engineering. Sometimes good enough is actually better than perfect. Zara listened to the translation of this conversation with interest. She examined the navigation readings for herself and spoke to her crew in their musical language. Tom could tell from their body language that they were impressed, but when Zara turned back to Tom, her expression was still serious. "You have proven helpful," the translator said, "but our regulations remain unchanged. We cannot release unknown biological entity without proper guild authorization." Tom's heart sank. He had hoped that proving his helpfulness would convince them to let him go. "How long does guild authorization take?" he asked. "Minimum 6 months for standard review. For unknown species contact, potentially years." Tom sat down on a nearby equipment crate. Years. His sister would think he was dead. His job would definitely be gone. His whole life would be over. But as he sat there, Tom noticed something else about the engineering section. The Valen had organized everything according to strict categories and protocols. Every tool had a designated place, every procedure had a specific sequence, every problem had a predetermined solution. It was incredibly efficient, but it was also rigid. Tom realized that this rigidity was probably why they couldn't bend their regulations to let him go, even though they now knew he wasn't dangerous. "What if we found a way to make my presence official?" Tom asked suddenly. Zara looked puzzled. "Explain." Tom stood up and began pacing. "You can't release me because I'm an unauthorized contact with an unknown species. But what if I wasn't unauthorized? What if my presence here became an official diplomatic mission?" The translation device worked on this concept. When the aliens heard it, they looked at each other with interest. "Your regulations probably have procedures for establishing first contact with new species, right?" Tom continued. "There must be protocols for diplomatic encounters." Nira said something to Zara, and her voice sounded excited. Zara responded, and Tom could tell they were discussing the possibilities. "First contact protocols do exist," Zara finally said through the translator, "but they require mutual consent from both species and formal documentation." "I can provide consent for humanity," Tom said. "I'm not a diplomat, but I can act as an emergency representative, and I can help you document everything properly." Tom walked over to one of the crystal interfaces and placed his hand on it. "Your ship's computers recorded everything that happened, right? My accidental boarding, our conversations, the way I helped with the navigation crisis. That's all documentation of peaceful first contact." Zara considered this. She spoke to her crew for several minutes, and Tom could tell they were debating the legal implications. Finally, she turned back to Tom. "This solution has potential merit, but it requires that you remain as official diplomatic representative until we establish formal relations with your government." "How long would that take?" Tom asked, unknown. "Your species location must be confirmed. Communication protocols established. Official diplomatic channels opened. Minimum several months." Tom's heart sank again, but then he had another idea. "What if your ship took me back to human space as part of the diplomatic mission?" he asked. "You could escort me home and establish official contact with Earth authorities at the same time. That would complete your first contact protocols and get me home." This suggestion created a flurry of discussion among the alien crew. Tom could tell that the idea was both exciting and terrifying to them. Making official contact with a new species was a huge responsibility, but Zara seemed intrigued by the possibility. "Such mission would require volunteer crew," she said. "Journey to unknown space carries significant risks." Nira stepped forward and said something to Zara. The short-haired engineer's voice was firm and determined. One by one, the other crew members spoke up as well. Zara listened to each of them and then turned back to Tom. "Crew volunteers for diplomatic mission to human space. We will escort you home and establish formal first contact with your authorities." Tom felt a surge of relief and gratitude. "Thank you. All of you. I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure this goes smoothly." Over the next few hours, Tom worked with Nira to optimize more of the ship's systems. He showed her human approaches to problem-solving that the Valen had never considered. In exchange, she taught him about Valen technology and culture. Tom learned that the Valen were an ancient species that had achieved technological perfection millions of years ago. But their perfection had become a limitation. They had difficulty adapting to new situations or thinking outside their established protocols. "Humans are young species," Nira said through the improving translation system. "But you think in ways we have forgotten. You see solutions we cannot see." Tom helped them recalibrate their environmental systems to be more efficient. He suggested improvements to their communication arrays that increased their range by 15%. Most importantly, he taught them that sometimes the best solution wasn't the most elegant one. In return, the Velen taught Tom about their philosophy of exploration. They traveled the galaxy not to conquer or exploit, but to learn and preserve knowledge. They had documented thousands of species and civilizations, maintaining a vast library of galactic culture and history. Humans will make excellent addition to galactic community, Zara told Tom on their third day together. Your adaptability and creative thinking are rare qualities. Tom spent the remaining weeks of the journey learning Velen language and customs while teaching them about human culture. He told them about Earth's diversity, about human art and music, about the way humans could work together despite their differences. The Velen were fascinated by human creativity and chaos. They had never encountered a species that thrived on unpredictability and change. To them, humans represented something entirely new in the galaxy. When they finally reached the edge of human space, Tom felt a mixture of excitement and sadness. He had come to respect and care for the Velen crew. What had started as an accidental imprisonment had become a genuine friendship. The first contact with Earth authorities went smoothly. Tom's explanation of the situation, backed by the Velen's diplomatic credentials, opened the door for formal relations between the two species. Within months, the first human-Velen exchange programs were established. Human engineers worked with Velen scientists to develop new technologies that combined human creativity with Velen precision. Velen scholars studied human culture and philosophy, finding new ways to approach ancient problems. Tom became Earth's first official ambassador to the Velen Exploration Guild. He split his time between Earth and Velen space, facilitating communication and cooperation between the two species. His accidental wrong turn had become humanity's first step into a larger galactic community. The maintenance worker who had simply been trying to catch a ride home had instead opened the door to the stars, and every time he traveled on a Velen ship, Tom made sure to board the correct vessel. Once was enough for that particular adventure, but as he looked out at the vast expanse of space filled with countless alien civilizations, Tom couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best discoveries happened when you took the wrong path. Human adaptability, creativity, and problem-solving had proven that young species could teach old ones new tricks, and the galaxy was a bigger, more interesting place because of it.